Welcome to Holistic Strategies, where we discuss the interconnectedness of body, mind, and spirit, and how you can tap into your highest potential while living a natural life of balance and adventure. Hi, this is Trevor Camplin, and today I'm going to introduce you to the basic premise of what we talk about on this podcast, which is living life through the understanding of holism. This podcast is for the outliers, the rebels, the skeptics, the people who have begun to see major corruption in high places in the world, and for those of you who are developing a stern interest in finding a peaceful life of sovereignty and solitude amongst a world that is wrought with chaos and turmoil. I'm also speaking to the people who want to contribute and cultivate something genuine to give to the world that people can actually prosper from. So if this sounds like you are in the right place. This podcast in general is going to show you how to land yourself in your own best case scenario that reflects a noticeable level of balance that you have found on the inside. I myself specialize in subconscious reprogramming and rewiring, and I actively take on clients who are ready to go through that transformative process. On this podcast in the future, you can expect to hear a lot more about that and how it can positively affect your life and teach you how to push past any limitations that either you, society, or anyone else has placed upon you. The information that I share here is to provoke you to think far beyond consensus reality or authoritarian educational platforms, and to help you gain access to dormant, latent abilities that you already possess as part of your natural existence. So before we jump into our topic for today, and since this is the first podcast, I'm going to open up and share my background with you, which can provide a bit of context for my listeners and my viewers out there. Now, my childhood and younger years are filled with all kinds of amazing memories of love, laughter, traveling, having fun with my family and my friends, and so on. But today, as your host, I'm going to talk about how my story and my experience relates to you, and how I was able to leave a sad, depressing, lonely lifestyle in my adulthood and connect with myself in a deeper way that led me to living out my childhood dream here in Asia while developing what I'd like to contribute to humanity. So let's go back to the year 1987. I'm 3 years old. I'm standing next to the fireplace in my home in Carpinteria, California, speaking with my mom and listing off each member of my family. As tears fill my eyes, I said, "So that means that Papa Vince is going to die? And Grandma? And my uncle? And you? You're all going to die. You're all going to leave me." "Yes, but not for a long time," my mother replied. I don't know how I'd landed on the topic of death at such a young age, but right then and there, something clicked and I demanded answers immediately. You see, I was raised in an evangelical household, so the topic of death was framed a bit different for me than some of the other children who I grew up with in the 1980s and 1990s. So from a pretty young age, I was under the impression that if people did not believe in the same redemption process that I was raised with, if people did not subscribe to Jesus Christ as their personal Lord and Savior, then their disbelief and their failure to accept this Lord and Savior would result in a divine judgment, either post-mortem or if that person were still alive at the end of the current dispensation, there was a forthcoming rapture event, which would take all the Christians up into the sky to enter into a heavenly realm, while everyone else on earth would be subject to a series of catastrophes and eventually go to hell for all eternity if they did not accept this Christ figure as their Lord and Savior during a second chance window period known as a 7-year tribulation. Now, Christian hell was described to me as a place of a weeping and gnashing of teeth. What I never understood about Christian hell was that if I died and if I didn't have a body anymore, how could I cry without having tear ducts? And how could I grind my teeth together if my unanimated body was laying in a casket 6 feet underground on its way to becoming compost? But I digress. Throughout my childhood, teenage years, and much of my 20s, I could rarely ever get to know someone outside of a church setting, of course, without thinking about their ultimate demise, which was their one-way ticket to hell. The religious doctrine that I accepted as a young person had such a heavy grip over my perception of the world that I had an extremely difficult time relating to people. I carried a huge ongoing sense of guilt and confusion in the back of my mind at all times. And I felt like my only other option during this period was to evangelize to people and try to convert them to an ideology and a premise about this life and the afterlife that I myself despised and found completely appalling. So in high school, this sense of confusion and guilt hadn't quite peaked yet. But back then, I would use food and overeating as a way to numb out and avoid thinking critically about my beliefs because food and overeating was decriminalized in my household and in the culture that I was surrounded by. However, after high school and college, after I moved out, alcohol became my new way to numb out and suppress these extremely heavy emotions that I had no idea how to deal with. So here I am now at 21 years of age. It's 2006. I randomly wake up in the hospital. I have at least 5 tubes inserted into my body. I have tubes going down my lungs. I can't talk. And the doctors and my family think that I'm probably going to die. The night before, I had been at a friend's bar, and we were the only people there at this bar. It was a bar that I used to work at, and I was there with a friend who was a doctor, an older friend. Now, a buddy of mine who was bartending that night put some pills in front of us at the bar. Those pills were called Klonopin. Many of you know probably what Klonopin is. It's a benzodiazepine, and it's used for serious anxiety. Now, the idea of taking pills while drinking had never interested me. I had heard far too many horror stories about this. But that night, as I was hanging out with a doctor friend and as someone who had been suffering from ongoing issues with sleep and chronic lethargy when I woke up in the morning, I went ahead and asked the doctor what this pill would do to me. So my doctor friend said that this pill would probably give me a good night's sleep and I could expect to feel refreshed in the morning. So at that time, to me, that sounded amazing. So given the circumstances, I took the pill and then I crashed on my doctor friend's couch that night. However, the next morning, I didn't wake up. My friends there at the house tried to wake me up, but I was unresponsive. My doctor friend took out a stethoscope and noticed that my lungs sounded like they were filled with fluid. So that night, even though I had only had 2 drinks, those 2 drinks and the pill were enough to knock me out to the point of where I couldn't wake myself up after a nocturnal acid reflux episode. So I basically vomited into my esophagus and it got into my lungs. So about 15 hours later, I woke up in the hospital. And once the drugs started to wear off a bit, I remember my mom telling me, I heard the voice of my mom, that I had been in an accident and that I was in the hospital. Several hours later, I noticed that the first girl I had ever made out with, her name was Katie, she had just happened to arrive in town. She was taking a break from college, and she heard that I had been hospitalized, and she was there sitting with me. A few hours later, I remember the last girl that I had been seeing a few months prior to this incident, whose name was also Katie, was then sitting next to me as well. She seemed pretty upset, I remember. Since I was on so many drugs at the time, it's hard to remember things clearly, but I do remember the looks on my friends and family members' faces. They were very worried and thought that I was going to die. However, something within me thought that idea was completely absurd. So that sense of worry that I saw in them was not resonant within myself. I wasn't planning on going anywhere. Now, here's the interesting part. My friend Kevin, who called the ambulance from the doctor's house that morning, mentioned something very interesting later on. He said that once they placed me into the ambulance on the stretcher, I sat up and with a puzzled look on my face, I said, "What the hell are you guys doing here?" As if I was speaking to a group of people or beings that I was not expecting to see. Now, keep in mind, I was totally blacked out at this point. I don't recall any of this happening, but I think who I was speaking to at that moment was my team or my spirit guides, if you will. So 2 weeks later, after enduring pneumonia in both of my lungs, an extremely painful case of pancreatitis, along with sepsis of my internal organs, I was released from the hospital, and I'll never forget that car ride that took place. I was looking at the world with a fresh set of eyes. It was like that John Carpenter movie, They Live, starring Rowdy Roddy Piper. And I never saw that film until years later. It's the one where he puts on the glasses and he can see all of the subliminal propaganda everywhere he looks. That's what that car ride was like. I had never felt more sober in my life. So at the end of that year, at the end of 2006, over the next 3 months, I started binge watching and reading anything controversial or conspiratorial that went against the grain of consensus reality. I wanted to know why I was living in what I was referring to as a zombified society. Now, my grandfather on the Italian side, on my mom's side, who was a Freemason and a Shriner, and his father before him, who also played in the Vatican band as a musician playing trombone in Rome there. We had at least 2 Freemasons in the family that I know of. My grandfather left some books behind. And it was around that time that I gained access to these books. One of them was called Clausen's Commentaries on Albert Pike's Morals and Dogma, which is a book about Scottish Rite Freemasonry made to increase the participation and input of members in Freemasonic lodges, aka men of the craft. So later in life, my grandfather seemed to have lost interest in upper level Freemasonry as he became more devoted to Lutheranism. But I don't believe that this book found me by accident. It actually sent me in a very clear direction to help satisfy my insatiable curiosity about the ideologies that many world leaders subscribe to, including Luciferianism and the left-hand path. So within 2 months of leaving the hospital, I had begun writing music alongside of researching many ancient, contemporary, and occult topics, eventually merging all of these efforts into assembling an extremely loud post-rock band called ATTN, or Attention. The conclusion that I come to at this point was that after months of driving my grandmother's 1980s Chrysler New Yorker around while listening to Pink Floyd's Dark Side of the Moon cassette tape on repeat, and then almost dying in the hospital from several illnesses all at once, and then waking up and seeing the real world matrix firsthand, and then finding cryptic books left behind from my grandfather, on top of entertaining the idea for the first time that I was actually creating my own reality from somewhere within my psyche, I felt like I was completely immersed in a sequence of no return and performing in a band that relayed the message to the public that we create our own reality and that there's an elite class that does not want us to know that was the best perceived option at my disposal. I wanted to see the people of society break free from the spell they were under, for them to take their attention away from the propaganda circus of news media, politics, etc., and place that valuable attention within themselves and their communities. So this was my new passion. Only back then, I didn't quite understand how the postmodern ego construct worked. This was 2006, so I was still a bit young. Now, flash forward to 2010, this was the year I called it quits with the band. I had been diving deeper into different forms of spirituality far beyond popular religious paradigms for the first time. And through several months of ongoing meditative breathwork practice and fasting on nothing but apples for a few days, I had a very powerful, illuminating Kundalini awakening. Now, at the time, I did not understand what was happening with me. But it's as if my body just knew what to do in order for the energy to unlock and to move through the body. I witnessed a lot of unexplainable events at that time. I would see things happen in my mind, then those things would play out in front of me. Back then, I didn't feel like I really had anyone in my life who I could talk to about these things. And after many failed attempts at trying to talk about these phenomena that I was experiencing, I learned to keep my mouth shut and I turned to books for answers instead. So I went from being a very social person who everyone in the local music scene knew to being a hermit studying an assortment of different esoteric topics. I led a pretty low-key life after that for about 6 years. I would still perform music here and there and DJ at clubs sometimes, but that all took a backseat to my studies into various forms of spirituality and my desire to find intersections between all of these. Now, in 2016, my best friend at the time invited me to travel to India. At that time, my research was centered around ancient India, the Sanskrit language, and Vedic cosmogony. So that invitation to travel there synced up great with some of the interviews I wanted to conduct while in the country of India. I got to interview a man named Jai Prakash, who was a high priest of the largest Jain temple in India. And I also interviewed a physicist from Chennai who has done a lot of comparative language analysis and was attempting to reveal Sanskrit as the mother tongue origin of all the world's languages, including Hebrew. So several months after arriving in India, I eventually made it to Kerala, India, where I stumbled into a Panchakarma program and learned Ayurvedic bodywork. After that, I had a little practice in the States, working on people's bodies and developing a way to pinpoint potentially problematic areas in the body by way of the zodiac and the person's birth details. Then, in 2018, I felt this strong urge to come to Southeast Asia, and I landed in Bali. So since being here, I have been working with people online, taking them on as clients, and using an assortment of physical, mental, and spiritual tools that I either found or developed. That passion to help people exit their matrix programming and discover a life of sovereignty, like the message I embedded into the music when I had my band, that has never really left me. 10 years ago, when I found myself going through a difficult process, I wished that I had someone there to talk to on a regular basis, someone that I could confide in and work with to help me navigate out of my stuck points. I had to be that person for myself. But back then, if I could have chosen to have a knowledgeable mentor available to teach me and guide me, someone who I could trust, I would have taken it. So now that is the role that I have chosen to play in the world professionally. That is the service I provide. And that whole story that I just told you is the reason why I provide it. See, I believe that we are living in unprecedented times right now, and that now, more than ever, we have before us the opportunity to run inventory on any disempowering beliefs that we have taken on and to resurrect our latent divine faculties. And this would include our innate psychic nature, something that we all have, but for most of us, it remains dormant. So now let's dive into the topic of holism and discuss what holistic strategies are all about. Holism, in the context of holistic health, is an approach that recognizes the interconnectedness of all aspects of an individual's well-being. It acknowledges that health is not solely determined by the physical body, but also influenced by mental, emotional, and spiritual factors. It acknowledges that these aspects of our being are not separate entities, but rather threads woven together to form the tapestry of our existence. And within this tapestry, the body serves as a remarkable foundation, or a temple, if you will, for our physical and energetic systems. Holistic health views a person as a complete, whole, integrated being, where each dimension contributes to their overall well-being. It emphasizes the importance of balance and harmony between these dimensions, considering lifestyle, relationships, environment, and beliefs. So, by addressing the person as already being whole and complete, holistic health seeks to promote optimal wellness, not only by treating symptoms, but also by addressing underlying imbalances and promoting self-healing. Now, I would like to point out that my approach to holism, the approach that I teach, is highly influenced by several ancient philosophies, which share some intriguing parallels with the concepts and discoveries found in the Copenhagen interpretation of quantum mechanics, particularly regarding the observer effect and the idea of vibration itself to be the underlying substance that composes our reality. While it's important to note that these connections are not direct or explicit, they do offer us, however, some interesting points of contemplation and philosophical resonance. Here are a few examples. The first one is called Advaita Vedanta. This Hindu philosophical system, particularly the teachings of non-duality, aka Advaita, shares similarities with certain aspects of quantum mechanics. Advaita Vedanta posits that the ultimate reality, which is called Brahman in Sanskrit, and quite possibly where the name Abraham originates, this ultimate reality is seen as indivisible, and that the perceived world of objects and phenomena is an illusory manifestation of this underlying oneness. So this idea of unity and interconnectedness resonates with the concept in quantum mechanics that all particles are fundamentally entangled and interconnected. So right now, I'm going to go a bit deeper into Advaita Vedanta because I think it is one of the most potently useful philosophies we can use to extrapolate as we test and experiment with metaphysical concepts. So the term Advaita translates to without a second, or not two, but not necessarily one either. But we'll get into that later. So when a pupil approaches an Advaita scholar with questions, that scholar is there to often reframe that pupil's question by removing all abstractions from the language that the pupil is using. So for instance, we often speak in terms of self and other. Now, an Advaita scholar will invite you to see that the perceived others out there, or a sense of otherness itself, is really non-existent, and that skin boundaries, your brain, and your nervous system do not define who you really are. The term Vedanta now refers to a teaching style called Neti Neti, which translates to not this, not this. So if you were to inquire the nature of existence with a Vedanta scholar, asking them questions such as, is humanity's nature intrinsically good or evil? Their answer is not going to be one or the other. Instead of either or, you will receive something more like neither nor, or something like not that and not the opposite of that, either. Now let's look at Advaita Vedanta within the context of a story. So there was once a king who had a dream that he was a beggar. This dream upset him to the point of where he had to call his advisors into him to have a little talk. He asked them, am I a king dreaming that I am a beggar, or am I a beggar dreaming that I am a king? One of his wise council members was an Advaita scholar, and his answer to the king was, neither. You are neither a king nor a beggar. Both of these things are appearances. Now, you could imagine that this news might confuse someone, especially a king type who is most likely programmed to think in terms of traditional opposites. But the lesson we receive from Neti Neti is that anytime the mind attempts to pull us onto one side of a polarity and to identify with that polarity, we have another option available to us, which involves identifying with neither of these options. So Neti Neti could be understood as not this and not this either. So it's kind of similar to Advaita, but it takes it a little step further. The next philosophy that parallels the Copenhagen interpretation of quantum mechanics is philosophical Taoism, and that's not to be confused with religious Taoism. Now, Taoist philosophy, specifically the concept of the Tao, emphasizes the dynamic interplay of opposing forces and the underlying unity that permeates reality. The Tao Te Ching speaks of the unnameable Tao, which parallels the idea of an underlying unified field that cannot fully be grasped or understood or even described. So this notion aligns with the mysterious and paradoxical nature of quantum phenomena, where particles exhibit both wave-like and particle-like behavior at the same time. So I would like to add that if you have never read the Tao Te Ching, I would highly advise that you do, especially during a time in history like this, because the wisdom found in this teaching is as relevant today as it was when it was written by Lao Tzu, which simply translates to old master, around 400 BC. Tao Te Ching roughly translates to the way of integrity or the way. Hermeticism is the next philosophy I'll list. Hermetic teachings, as found in the Corpus Hermeticum and the Emerald Tablet, describe the principle of correspondence, as above, so below. This principle suggests that the macrocosm and the microcosm are interconnected and that they mirror each other. In quantum mechanics, the observer effect suggests that the act of observation itself influences the behavior of particles, highlighting the interdependence between the observer and the observed, a reflection of the as above, so below principle. Buddhism is the last one I'll mention. Now, some interpretations of Buddhist philosophy, particularly the concept of emptiness, which is dubbed shunyata, bears similarities to the nature of reality described by quantum mechanics. Emptiness emphasizes the absence of inherent independent existence in all phenomena. This aligns with the idea in quantum mechanics that particles do not possess fixed properties until they are observed, and their existence is contextual and dependent on observation itself. This implication is often seen as too much for most people to entertain, including Einstein, because it implies that the things we see in this world that we don't like, the origin of these things can actually be found within us, within the totality of our being, beyond just the body and the mind. And that which we judge in this world is actually rooted in a type of unconscious, spiritual level self-judgment. I think Nisargadatta Maharaj summed it up very well in his reply to one of his satsang attendants. He said to them, "There is only one mistake you are making. You take the inner for the outer and the outer for the inner. What is in you, you take to be outside of you, and what is outside, you take to be in you. The mind and feelings are external, but you take them to be intimate. You believe the world to be objective, while it is entirely a projection of your psyche. This is the basic confusion. You have to think yourself out of it. There is no other way. Now, to most people, this is all going to sound a bit paradoxical. Most people perceive God as an entity with some relatable human characteristics, but then project onto God characteristics that are far superior to human abilities. We say, well, if there's a God, then that means God is all-knowing and all-seeing, and that God is omnipresent. And that would be correct because nothing could be separate from God since everything is made from the same underlying substance. You could call that substance energy, consciousness, or conscious energy if you like. But what is this nothing we refer to when we say nothing could be separate from God? If we are to pull from Advaita Vedanta, we need to understand the difference between God and the Absolute Supreme. Being, or God, on one hand, holds all knowledge. Being could also be seen as the I am principle, God, or consciousness itself. On the other hand, we have non-being, which is ever present, but it is not shaped by knowledge, perception, or any field data collected from the aggregate sense organs. Now, the Absolute Supreme cannot be defined within a domain because it can't be measured, and it technically can't be categorized as a noun. You could say that the Absolute is senior to consciousness or prior to a sense of being, something in particular, like a body or a world or any kind of noun. The Absolute is not something you can know. It is only something that you can be because it has no vehicle outside of itself to witness or experience itself. Therefore, within the Absolute, there is a function to spontaneously project a world, a body, a mind, and a life onto itself. So being and non-being split themselves into what appears to be two separate modalities. However, they are fundamentally interlocked, and you could say that this is how God witnesses itself. Again, Maharaj alludes to this when he says, "Wisdom tells me that I am nothing, non-being, and love tells me I am everything, being. And between the two, my life flows." The objective here is to see that your eternal seat forever remains on the Rubicon between being and non-being. Not two, Advaita, and not this, Vedanta. So creation isn't something that has to be seen as happening a long time ago, but rather something that has been happening live in the now moment, along with both preservation and destruction, all at the same time. Now, it's essential to approach these connections with a nuanced perspective, acknowledging that ancient philosophies and religions were not explicitly based on quantum mechanics that we know of. However, the resonances between these concepts offer fascinating points of contemplation and highlight the potential convergence between scientific discoveries and timeless philosophical inquiries into the nature of reality. So with that out of the way, let's dive into the 3-in-1 trifecta that makes up holism and holistic health, and let's start with the body. What is the role of the body? The body could be likened to a masterpiece of intricate design and a vessel through which we experience the world around us. In the realm of holistic health, the body takes center stage, playing a vital role in our overall well-being. Now, I see the body as a messenger or a faithful companion that whispers the secrets of our well-being. It communicates through sensations, symptoms, and signals guiding us towards balance and harmony. Every ache, every pain, every flutter of the heart is a language inviting us to listen and to pay attention and to respond with care. Holistic health invites us to cultivate a deep sense of body awareness, to become attuned to its needs and its wisdom. It encourages us to nourish the body with wholesome food, to move and exercise it with joy, and to provide it with rest and rejuvenation that it craves. In doing so, we honor the body as a sacred vessel, supporting its vital functions and allowing it to thrive. Now, at the same time, holistic health goes beyond the physicality of just the body. It recognizes that our emotional well-being is also intimately connected to our physical state. Our bodies store the memories of past experiences, the unresolved emotions that linger within our cells. The body becomes a canvas upon which our emotional landscape gets painted. Now, to achieve holistic health, we must tend to the emotional aspects of our well-being, acknowledging and processing our feelings with compassion. We must create space for healing, allowing emotions to flow and release, freeing ourselves from the burdens that weigh us down. In doing so, we honor the body as an instrument of emotional expression and liberation. So the body is intertwined with energetic realms that exist beyond our physical senses. Holistic health recognizes the existence of subtle energy systems that flow through and around our bodies, such as the chakras, meridians, and the aura. These energetic pathways influence our well-being, impacting our physical, mental, and emotional states. So through practices like Reiki, yoga, and meditation, we can engage these energy systems, balancing and harmonizing the flow of vital energy within us. We can awaken our innate healing abilities, tapping into the profound wisdom that resides within the depths of our being. So in doing so, we honor the body as a conduit for universal energy, allowing it to dance in rhythm with the cosmic universal forces. Let's talk about the mind now. What is the nature of the mind? The mind is likened to a restless wandering traveler. It continuously roams through a vast landscape of thoughts, emotions, desires, and memories, weaving intricate narratives that captivate our attention. Now, it's pretty common to become entangled in this intricate web, believing that our thoughts define who we are. And in this identification, suffering takes hold of us. Philosophies such as Advaita Vedanta reminds us that the mind is merely an instrument. It is a tool for our conscious experience in this world. It is not our true self. So just as a river flows through a valley but does not define its essence, the mind flows through our consciousness but does not define our true nature. By mistakenly identifying with the mind, we fall into a state of illusion and limited perception. When we align our understanding with the Advaita Vedantic perspective, we recognize that our true self, the eternal essence within us, transcends the fleeting nature of the mind. We are the witness, the silent observer, beyond the incessant stream of thoughts. In this realization, we find liberation from the suffering caused by the mind's incessant chatter. The mind, in its ceaseless activity, generates an illusion of separation. It creates this sense of individuality, of I and mine, which becomes the breeding ground for desires, fears, and attachments. And as an aside, I'm not suggesting that anything that resembles Marxism is a solution here. We can dive into that in another episode. But through this false sense of separation, the mind becomes entangled in a web of illusion, seeking fulfillment in external possessions, achievements, and relationships. However, Advaita Vedanta teaches us that true fulfillment lies in transcending the mind's limitations and recognizes our inherent unity with all life. So through self-inquiry and meditation, we can pierce the veil of illusion created by the mind. We can delve into the depths of our being, questioning the nature of the self. Who are you beyond the thoughts? Have you ever thought of this? What remains when the mind is still? These contemplations lead us to the realization that we are not the mind. We are the pure awareness in which the mind arises. So by disidentifying from the mind, we detach ourselves from its incessant fluctuations. We observe thoughts passing by like clouds in the sky without getting entangled or carried away by them. So in this spacious awareness, we discover a profound sense of peace, clarity, and freedom. Identifying with the mind creates a constant state of restlessness. We become slaves to our thoughts and our emotions, tossed around by waves of joy, and then sorrow, and then hope, and then despair. But when we realize our true nature is pure consciousness, we detach from this constant roller coaster of emotions. We discover an unshakable inner stability, a serene presence amidst the storms of life. True holism teaches us to transcend the limitations of the mind and to recognize that our true self is boundless and interconnected with the entirety of existence. So as we awaken to this truth, we can find liberation from suffering. We realize that the mind's creations are fleeting, impermanent, and ultimately illusory. True fulfillment lies not in the mind's projections, but in the recognition of our inherent oneness with everything. Now, let's talk about the spiritual nature of existence. What is this everlasting presence that we call spirit? When we're discussing holism through the perspective of philosophies like Advaita Vedanta, there lies a profound truth that invites us to question the very nature of our existence, as we mentioned earlier. It urges us to transcend the boundaries of our physical and mental constructs because, again, it is through these constructs that suffering arises. Now, Advaita Vedanta teaches us that we are not the body, nor are we the mind. The body, with all of its senses and sensations, and the mind, with its thoughts and emotions, are but instruments through which we can navigate the world of duality. They're not good or bad, but they are impermanent and subject to constant change. So when we identify solely with the body, we limit ourselves to the confines of the physical realm. We become entangled in the transient nature of the body's pleasures and pains, forever seeking fulfillment in external sensory experiences. We attach our sense of self to the appearance, to health, and to desires of the body, forgetting the eternal essence that exists beyond its confines. So similarly, when we identify solely with the mind, we confine ourselves to the realm of thoughts and emotions. We become entangled in the ceaseless chatter of the mind, attaching ourselves to the stream of fleeting thoughts, judgments, and desires. We mistakenly believe that our true nature lies in the ebb and flow of mental activity, failing to recognize the deeper, unchanging consciousness that permeates everything. So by identifying with the body or the mind, this leads to suffering because both are subject to change and are therefore unreliable sources of lasting happiness. The body's youthful vigor fades with time, and the senses lose their sensitivity, and we are left with grasping for fleeting pleasures that ultimately dissolve into dissatisfaction. The mind's thoughts and emotions are going to be fluctuating incessantly, leading us into cycles of attachment and aversion. And then we become trapped in the turbulence of our own mental projections. Now, holism, in the context of Advaita Vedanta, invites us to realize that we are the eternal consciousness that transcends both body and mind. We are the silent witness, the pure awareness that underlies all experiences. So when we disentangle our perception from the identification with the body and the mind, we awaken to our true nature, unbounded and unchanging. This is who we really are. In this awakening, we find liberation from suffering. We recognize that the transient nature of the body and mind does not and will never define who we really are. We realize that true fulfillment and lasting peace lies beyond the limitations of the physical and mental realms. We rest in the eternal presence of pure consciousness, untouched by the dualities of the world. So by disidentifying with the body and the mind, again, we step into a state of freedom, a state of transcendence. We no longer cling to external appearances or fleeting thoughts and emotions. We embrace the interconnectedness of everything, recognizing that the same consciousness that animates us, that animates our bodies, flows through everything that exists in all realms. I want to say thank you for joining me on this first podcast. Again, it's my pleasure to bring a holistic framework to the public at this time and to help shed light on the fact that who we really are in reality is already whole and complete, and that the activity that happens in the personal development space in general doesn't have to define us, but it's there to help sharpen our body-mind apparatus and to draw us into a lifestyle of natural flow as nature itself shows us the way. So if you'd like to learn more about what I do, the work that I offer with subconscious reprogramming, including the nocturnal reprogramming technique, where I show you how to use your own voice to write your life script and install it into your psyche while you sleep at night, feel free to visit me at trevorkamplin.com or contact me via DMs on Instagram at Holistic Strategies.